My son thought I wouldn't notice. But that October morning in the garage of my Aspen home, I saw him slip something into my leather travel case, quick, practiced, deliberate. He thought I was focused on my fishing reels. He thought the old man's eyes had grown too slow. But 30 years chasing criminals had taught me to catch the smallest lies. What he tucked away wasn't a gift. It was a weapon aimed straight at me. For a moment I stood frozen, watching him wipe his palms against his jeans, his voice too cheerful when he said, "Morning, Dad." Heading up to the lake again, he avoided my eyes. Then, as fast as he had come, he disappeared up the stairs. That's how betrayal looks. Not with a bang, but with a quiet slip of the hand. My name is Gregory Harlow. I am 63 years old, a retired federal investigator and a widower. For 30 years, I hunted down liars, smugglers, gamblers, and men who thought the law couldn't touch them. I stood in courtrooms, testified in cases that made the evening news, and watched hardened criminals fold under cross-examination. I thought I had seen it all, but I was wrong. Nothing in my career prepared me for the day my own son turned into the kind of man I used to arrest. Damien is 29, my only child. After his mother, Eleanor, died 4 years ago, I did everything I could to steady him. I paid his rent, covered his debts, bought him a Maserati when he said it would get him back on his feet. I told myself it was grief that hollowed him out, made him gamble too much, borrow too much, lie too often. I excused him because love has a way of blinding a father. But love can't hide what I saw in that garage. Desperation turned into betrayal. I didn't touch the travel case. I didn't rush to confront him. Years in law enforcement had taught me that when someone believes they've gotten away with something, they make mistakes. And mistakes, more than anything else, reveal the truth. Still, my heart was pounding as I stared at that case. What had he hidden? Why in my bag? Why now, after weeks of tense dinners and whispered phone calls behind locked doors? The night before, Damien had barely touched the steak I grilled. He swirled a glass of Bordeaux I'd saved for special occasions, but his hands trembled. Then he leaned forward and whispered, "Dad, I need $75,000. Right now." 75,000. I nearly choked on my food. I'd already spent more than that bailing him out of emergencies, and now he wanted another fortune. I asked where it was going. He snapped back, "You don't understand. These people aren't patient." Then he stormed upstairs, leaving me alone with his untouched plate and the echo of Eleanor's empty chair. Now, less than 12 hours later, I stood in the garage, realizing his plan had already shifted. If I wouldn't give him the money willingly, he had another way. And that way involved planting something in my possession that could ruin me forever. I had spent a lifetime believing my badge and my instincts would protect me from the world's evil. But that morning, I understood something far more painful. Sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from enemies outside your home. It comes from the people you love most. Have you ever looked at your own child and realized they might choose your destruction just to save themselves? That morning, staring at my travel case, I knew that was exactly what was happening. And if you're listening right now, I want you to tell me, where are you watching from? Because I need to know how far this story of betrayal travels. How many of you have felt the same cut? Not from strangers, but from your very own blood. After Damien vanished upstairs that morning, I stayed in the garage longer than usual, staring at the case that now felt like a snake coiled at my feet. I tried to steady myself, but the truth gnawed at me. My son had crossed into dangerous territory, and he'd chosen me as his pawn. You need to understand the setting of this story. For 30 years, I built a career with the Federal Investigations Bureau. It was demanding work, but it paid well, and Eleanor and I invested wisely. Our home in Aspen wasn't just a house, it was a statement. A sprawling cedar-framed estate nestled against the mountains, worth nearly $2.5 million. From the wine cellar stocked with Bordeaux and Napa vintages to the Italian marble counters, Eleanor adored every corner, carried the weight of years of effort. When Eleanor passed, that house became both my comfort and my prison. Her absence echoed through its vaulted ceilings and across its polished floors. I would sit alone at the mahogany dining table she had insisted on buying from Paris, surrounded by empty chairs, and wonder if the silence would ever loosen its grip. Damien was supposed to be my reason to keep going. My only child, the last piece of Eleanor I had left. I told myself that every check I wrote, every bill I covered, every car payment I signed off on was part of honoring her memory. She had always said, "Gregory, he's not strong like you. He'll need us longer than most sons need their parents." But love has a way of disguising weakness as duty. Damien grew up knowing privilege. Private schools that cost more than some families' annual income. Spring breaks in Europe. A brand new Maserati when he turned 25, though he'd already wrecked the BMW I gave him at 21. He had access to more than I ever dreamed of at his age. And yet here he was, nearly 30, living under my roof, unable to hold down a job, drowning in debt he wouldn't explain. I had tried to chalk it up to grief. Losing his mother young had broken something inside him. I thought time therapy and patience would heal it. I told myself that if I could survive burying Eleanor, then surely I could survive carrying Damien until he found his footing. But lately, even my patience was fraying. The money was vanishing faster than I could replenish it. My retirement accounts, built from decades of service, were shrinking, eaten by withdrawals labeled emergencies. I found casino receipts tucked in his jacket pockets, but he swore they were old. I noticed new clothes, designer watches, but no income to pay for them. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to see him as my son, not as a case file. But every instinct sharpened from 3 decades of chasing cons told me otherwise. Standing in that garage, I thought of Eleanor. I wondered what she would have said if she'd seen her son plant that black-wrapped package in my case. She always believed in redemption, always pushed me to forgive. But she also had a way of knowing when the time for forgiveness had ended. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a strange certainty. Perhaps God had kept me alive through all the dangers of my career. Not to face down criminals on the street, but to face this trial inside my own home. Maybe He had placed the strength in me to see through the lies, even when those lies came from my only son. The thought didn't comfort me, it chilled me. Because if that was true, then the path ahead wouldn't be about saving Damien. It would be about saving myself from him. I closed the garage door, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. Upstairs, I could hear Damien pacing, his voice low as he made another hushed phone call. The words floated down through the floorboards. "I'll get it. Don't worry. He won't say no again." My stomach tightened. Whoever he was talking to, it wasn't a friend. It was someone dangerous, someone pulling strings behind the scenes. And if Damien had already tried to set me up once, I knew he wouldn't hesitate to do it again. That morning, surrounded by the trappings of wealth Eleanor and I had built, I realized those luxuries had become bait in someone else's game. and the player across from me wasn't a stranger. It was my own son. Dinner that Friday night should have been a celebration. I had gone all out, dry-aged ribeye steaks seared on the cast-iron skillet Eleanor once used, truffle butter melting on top, asparagus grilled with sea salt, and a bottle of Chateau Margaux from the cellar, a vintage I had been saving for a special moment. I told myself this was it, a chance to remind Damien that we were still a family, that beneath the strain there was still something worth holding on to. But the moment he sat down at the mahogany table, I knew celebration was the last thing on his mind. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling as he poured the wine. He swirled the glass, but he didn't drink. He didn't even touch the steak on his plate. "Dad," he said finally, his voice low urgent. "I need $75,000. The words hit me harder than a gunshot. I set down my fork, staring across the table at the boy I had once taught to ride a bike, the young man who had walked across a private school graduation stage wearing a suit I paid for. 75,000. I repeated, my voice calm but my chest tightening. "That's not a favor, Damien. That's a fortune. What kind of trouble are you in?" He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. "You don't understand. These people I owe, they're not patient. They're not going to wait for me to figure this out." I studied him carefully. "What people? Loan sharks, gamblers. You've been down this road before. I've helped you. I've paid your debts. Where has it gotten us?" His jaw clenched. "You think I'm lying? You think I enjoy coming to you like this? I wouldn't ask if it weren't life or death." I wanted to believe him. God knows I wanted to. But the truth is, I had heard this before, different amounts, different excuses, always wrapped in desperation, that never quite explained where the money went. "Damien," I said slowly, "I've given you more chances than I can count. I bought you that Maserati you said would get you back on your feet. I covered the gambling debts you swore were a one-time mistake. I paid off the credit cards you ran up chasing designer suits. And here you are, asking for 75,000 more." He pushed back his chair so hard it screeched against the polished oak floor. "You don't get it. You think this is about me being irresponsible. If I don't pay, they'll come here. They'll come after me. After us." His words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. I thought of Eleanor, how she had always begged me to be patient with him. But patience had its limits. My voice hardened. "I'm not writing another check, Damien. Not this time. Not for that amount. Not when I don't even know who you owe." For a split second, his eyes burned with something I had never seen before. Hatred, cold and sharp, directed at me as if I were the enemy. Then he shoved his hands into his pockets, muttered something under his breath, and stormed upstairs. The house fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock Eleanor had loved. I sat there at the head of the table, staring at the untouched meal, the wine still glistening in crystal glasses, the empty chair where my wife should have been. I had built this life, this house, this table for family, and now it felt like all of it had turned into props in a theater of betrayal. As I gathered the dishes, I heard faint footsteps overhead, pacing back and forth. Then the muffled sound of his voice, hushed, urgent, like a man making promises he couldn't keep. "I'll get it. Don't worry." He won't say no again. The words froze me mid-step. He wasn't talking to a friend. He was talking to someone who had him in their grip. And in that moment, surrounded by trappings of wealth that had once symbolized success, I realized the truth. My son wasn't asking for help. He was warning me that the storm had already arrived. The next morning, the sun barely crept over the ridge of the Rockies, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gray. I went back to the garage pretending to pack for my fishing trip. The travel case sat on the workbench, its leather surface gleaming in the early light. To anyone else, it was just a bag. To me, it felt like a trap. My hands shook as I unlatched the buckles. The sound of the clasps clicking open echoed through the garage like the crack of a judge's gavel. I lifted the side compartment where I'd seen Damien's hand linger. There, nestled between spare reels and spools of line, was the package black tissue paper, wrapped tight like a gift no father would ever want to receive. I peeled it open carefully, the paper crinkling in my trembling fingers. Inside was a clear plastic bag filled with fine white powder. I didn't need a lab test. 30 years of evidence rooms and crime scenes told me exactly what I was looking at: fentanyl. Enough of it to put me behind bars for the rest of my life. I sank onto the stool beside the workbench, the bag heavy in my hand. My own son had done this. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. He had planted it in my case, counting on me to carry it with me until the right person found it. The realization cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. I had arrested men for less. I had seen fathers and sons testify against each other in federal court. But I never imagined my life would become one of those cases. I thought back to Eleanor. I remembered her hand gripping mine in the hospital before she slipped away. "Be patient with him, Gregory. He'll need you." I had promised her I would. I had promised her I'd never give up on our boy. And for 4 long years I kept that promise, even as Damien drained my accounts, wrecked cars, and spun lies to cover his debts. But love has limits. Staring at that bag, I realized something chilling. Damien wasn't just drowning in his own choices, he was willing to drag me under with him. My retirement, my freedom, my name, even Eleanor's memory, he had gambled it all. The garage felt colder than the October air outside. I looked at the shelves lined with Eleanor's gardening tools, the fishing rods I'd bought Damien when he was 12, the family photos I kept framed near the door. Every object seemed to whisper the same truth: the boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man who saw me not as a father, but as a shield, a scapegoat, a way to survive one more day. And yet part of me still hesitated. This was my son, my blood. Could I really believe he wanted to destroy me? Then I remembered his words at dinner. "They're not patient. If I don't pay, things will happen." He hadn't been asking for help. He'd been warning me. This was his plan all along. If I wouldn't hand him $75,000 willingly, he'd take it by eliminating me. The bag of powder burned in my hand. I set it down carefully, rewrapped it in the tissue paper, and slid it back into the case. My breathing steadied, not because the fear was gone, but because something else had taken its place: resolve. Damien thought he was playing chess with an old man who'd forgotten the rules. He had no idea I'd spent 3 decades staying 3 moves ahead of criminals smarter than him. As I closed the case, I caught my reflection in the garage window. The man staring back wasn't just a father anymore. He was a survivor preparing for war. Have you ever discovered proof that your own child was trying to destroy you? If you were in my place holding that evidence in your hands, would you confront them, or would you wait and strike back when they least expected it? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how many of you have faced the unthinkable. I didn't sleep that night. The bag of fentanyl haunted me like a ticking bomb, even after I tucked it back into the travel case. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind rattling the windows, felt like footsteps coming for me. By dawn, I knew I couldn't sit still and wait for my son's trap to spring. If Damien wanted a game, I would play, but on my terms. When I walked back into the garage, the case sat on the bench, ordinary to the untrained eye-poisoned treasure to mine. I opened it again, lifted the black tissue and stared at the bag. 2 ounces of powder that could end my life in seconds if the wrong hands found it. The weight of it wasn't just physical. It carried the full measure of my son's betrayal. I told myself what every investigator learns on day 1, the best defense is a good offense. Damien thought he'd set me up. He never considered that I might turn the board around. Through the garage window, I saw his Maserati parked in the driveway, sunlight glinting off its sleek black hood. $140,000 worth of Italian engineering, bought on the back of my retirement savings. Damien had begged me for it when he was 25, promising he'd pay me back once his business deals took off. Those deals never existed. That car was more than transportation. It was his mask, the way he hid his debts and failures behind a facade of success. Now it would become his undoing. I wrapped the fentanyl, carefully tucked it under my arm, and took the spare keys from the hook by the door. My hands were steady now. Whatever hesitation I had felt the night before was gone. Love had carried me far, but survival demanded something colder. The Maserati's trunk opened with a soft click. Inside were leather driving gloves, a designer gym bag he hadn't used in months, and detailing supplies that cost more than most people's monthly groceries. I lifted the bag slightly and slid the package beneath it, pushing it deep against the wheel well. Hidden, but not too hidden. Easy enough for trained eyes to find when the time came. As I closed the trunk, I caught sight of my reflection in the glossy paint. For a moment, I didn't see a father. I saw the investigator I used to be, calm, calculating, always 2 steps ahead. I thought of Eleanor again. She had been the balance to my steel, the heart to my head. "He'll need you, Gregory," she had whispered at the end. "Be patient with him." I had been patient. I had sacrificed. But patience had turned into enablement, and enablement had turned into danger. If Eleanor were still here, maybe she would have softened me. But she wasn't. And I believed in that cold October dawn that perhaps God had spared me for this moment to see the truth clearly and act before it was too late. I wiped the trunk handle clean, returned the keys to their hook, and went back inside. The house was silent, but upstairs I could hear faint movements, Damien pacing, talking in hushed tones on his phone again. He was planning his next move, confident I was already trapped. He had no idea the game had shifted. Back in the garage, I cleaned my travel case thoroughly, scrubbing every surface, every corner Damien's hands might have touched. Then I repacked it neatly with lures and reels, nothing more. To anyone who looked, it would appear untouched, innocent. The bait was gone, and the hunter had become the prey. As I stood there, the weight of what I had done settled on me. I wasn't just moving evidence. I was moving the line between father and son, severing something that could never be mended. But the alternative was worse: prison, ruin, disgrace. Damien had chosen this path. I had only chosen to survive it. The garage clock ticked steady and merciless. I knew it wouldn't be long before Damien made his move, before the authorities came knocking. And when they did, the truth would be waiting in the trunk of a Maserati that had always been more his than mine. It didn't take long. By late afternoon, I heard Damien's footsteps thunder down the stairs. He wore his tailored navy suit, the one I'd paid for when he insisted appearances mattered in business. His hair slicked back, his expression calm, almost smug. He glanced at me in the living room and said, "Heading out for an interview, Dad. Wish me luck." I only nodded. My years in law enforcement taught me when a suspect was performing, and Damien was putting on the show of his life. Within minutes, his car engine roared down the driveway. The silence he left behind was heavy, but not for long. Barely an hour later, I heard his voice again, but this time muffled from upstairs. I had slipped into the hallway and stood still listening. He was on the phone. "Yes, this is Damien Harlow. My father is hiding fentanyl in his travel case. I saw it myself this morning. He's acting nervous. Please hurry before he moves it." My heart hammered, but my face stayed calm. He had taken the bait. 15 minutes later, the flashing lights cut across my windows. 3 marked SUVs, 1 unmarked sedan, and a tactical van rolled into my driveway. Officers fanned out across the property, efficient, professional. And at their head stood Detective Sofia Ramirez, a woman I had worked alongside for more than a decade. Her eyes met mine as I opened the door. There was regret there, but also duty. "Gregory," she said, "we need to talk. We have a warrant to search the premises for controlled substances." I stepped aside, my voice steady. "Of course, Sophia. Do what you need to do." Damien appeared from upstairs, his face painted with innocent shock. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. Then he turned helpfully to the officers. "It's in the garage, his travel case. I can show you." I watched as he led them with confidence, like a man guiding hunters straight to their prey. He pointed to the case on my workbench. "Right there." He was acting strange this morning, spending a lot of time with it. The lead DEA agent photographed the bag, then opened it carefully. My stomach clenched, though I knew exactly what they would find: nothing. He lifted every compartment, examined every lure, every reel, every spool of line. When he closed it, confusion crossed his face. "Sir, there's nothing here." Damien froze. "No, that's impossible." Check again. It was wrapped in black tissue paper. Detective Ramirez turned her sharp eyes on him. "You seem very certain about what should be in your father's case. Why is that?" He stammered words, tumbling. I thought I saw." But before he could finish, the lead agent cut in. "Let's expand the search. Check the vehicles." Damien's composure cracked. His voice went high, defensive. "Why my car? I called you about him, not me." But the team was already moving. They popped the trunk of his Maserati. A moment later, one officer lifted out the black tissue-wrapped package, holding it up for everyone to see. The clear bag inside glittered under the garage lights. Silence fell heavy. Detective Ramirez's voice was cold as steel. "Damien Harlow, you're under arrest for possession of fentanyl with intent to distribute and for filing a false report." The color drained from Damien's face. "No, he planted it. My father did this." His voice cracked with desperation. "He's trying to frame me." Ramirez didn't blink. "Then why did you insist we search his travel case instead of your car? Why are you the one who placed the call?" The cuffs clicked around his wrists. He looked at me, then eyes burning with fury, betrayal, maybe even recognition that he had lost. "You did this," he spat. I met his gaze, calm and unflinching. "I have no idea what you're talking about." They led him past me, his protests echoing off the garage walls. And in that moment, I felt something shift deep inside me. It wasn't victory, not really. It was survival. I thought of Eleanor, of the promises I had made. Maybe this was what God had prepared me for all along, the strength to see through lies even when they came from my own son. As the officers secured the evidence and Damien's shouts faded into the night, I stood in the quiet of my garage, surrounded by the tools of a life built on discipline and truth. And I knew this battle was far from over, but the first move had been mine. 3 weeks later, I sat in the oak-paneled courtroom of the Denver County Courthouse, the same building where I had once testified against men whose names still filled the newspapers. But this time I wasn't on the witness stand. I was in the gallery watching my own son in an orange jumpsuit shackled at the wrists. Damien looked smaller than I remembered, the tailored suits and Italian shoes stripped away. His hair hung limp, his face pale. For the first time in years, he looked like a boy again. Not the young man who'd swaggered around in a Maserati, but the child Eleanor and I had once taken to Sunday markets, the boy who had begged for one more ice cream cone. The image was almost enough to break me. Almost. The prosecutor spoke with clinical precision. Your Honor, the defendant, Damien Harlow, was found in possession of approximately 2 ounces of fentanyl, street value of nearly $30,000. This amount exceeds personal use. We charge intent to distribute. Furthermore, Mr. Harlow filed a false police report accusing his own father of the crime he himself committed. She held up the black tissue paper, sealed now in an evidence bag. The jury leaned forward. And it doesn't end there, she continued. Mr. Harlow forged his father's signature on loan documents totaling $120,000, using the family's Aspen estate as collateral. He concealed gambling debts, casino markers, and outstanding payments to known loan sharks. This was not desperation alone, it was deception layered and deliberate. Every word struck like a hammer. I felt the eyes of the courtroom shift between Damien and me, weighing the contrast, a father who had spent 30 years upholding the law, and a son who had twisted every gift into a weapon. Damien's court-appointed attorney tried to soften the blow. My client has struggled since the untimely death of his mother. He turned to gambling as a coping mechanism, then to loans when gambling debts mounted. Addiction clouded his judgment. His actions, while reprehensible, were driven by desperation, not malice. I wanted to believe that. God knows I searched his face for even a flicker of remorse. But when Damien finally stood to speak, the words felt rehearsed. I want to apologize to my father. He mumbled, eyes fixed on the floor. I never meant for things to go this far. I was desperate. I made terrible choices. Empty words. His voice carried no weight, no warmth. It was a performance for the judge, not a confession from a son. Judge Hamilton leaned forward, his gavel poised. Mr. Harlow, you had every advantage, a father who provided a home worth millions, opportunities most young men only dream of. Yet you chose deception. You tried to destroy the very man who gave you life. This court cannot overlook the gravity of your crimes. I sentence you to 6 years in federal prison for drug trafficking, forgery, and filing a false report. The gavel struck. The sound reverberated through the chamber like thunder, like a door slamming shut on the remnants of fatherhood. As deputies led Damien away, he turned his head just enough to glare at me. His lips formed silent words I had no trouble reading. This isn't over. I sat there, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my heart strangely calm. There were no tears left, just a hollow ache where hope used to be. I had spent years trying to save my son, pouring money, patience, and love into a bottomless pit. In return, he had tried to bury me under lies and poison. The courtroom emptied around me, lawyers shuffling papers, jurors whispering, reporters scribbling notes. I remained in my seat, staring at the grain of the oak bench in front of me. For the first time in months, I felt a strange clarity. Damien's choices were no longer mine to carry. The estate, the forged loans, the debts, they were still battles ahead. But in that moment, sitting in the courtroom where justice had been served, I realized something profound. Love had blinded me. Truth had set me free. When the trial ended and the sentence was handed down, most men might have walked out of that courtroom feeling vindicated. But I didn't. I walked out heavier than I had walked in, as though the gavel had cracked, not just the life of my son, but the foundation of everything Eleanor and I had built together. The Aspen estate loomed larger in my thoughts than ever before. It wasn't just a house, it was our dream. Eleanor had picked every detail: the cedar beams that stretched across the vaulted ceilings, the chandeliers we bought from an antique dealer in Florence, the stone fireplace where she used to read novels on winter nights. That house carried 30 years of our life together, a monument to discipline, hard work, and love. But now it also carried the weight of Damien's betrayal. When I returned home after the sentencing, the silence of the house was suffocating. Every corner reminded me not of love, but of what it had cost me to cling to it. The Maserati still sat in the driveway, impounded and tagged as evidence. The dining table still bore faint scratches from Damien's fists slamming against it. The wine cellar was half empty, not because we drank, but because Damien had sold bottles behind my back. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene dressed as luxury. My lawyer, a sharp man named Lewis Grant, came by that week with files stacked under his arm. He spread them across my mahogany desk, page after page of contracts, bank slips, casino markers. "The good news," he said, adjusting his glasses, "is that your son's forgery is clear. Any expert can see it. These loans Elena Torres wrote up won't stand. The house was never legally transferred. Relief should have washed over me, but it didn't. The technical victory didn't erase the stains." "So the house is mine?" I asked flatly. Lewis nodded. "Legally, yes. But practically, it's tainted. Investigations will keep circling. Reporters will keep calling. You could stay here, Gregory, but you'll never have peace." I knew he was right. I'd already seen my neighbors' curious stares, already heard the whispers at the local market. To them, the Aspen estate was no longer the Harlow family home. It was the place where a son betrayed his father. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the fireplace Eleanor had loved. My hand rested on her photograph, her smile frozen in time. I thought about her final words: "Be patient with him." I had been patient, too patient, and now patience had nearly destroyed me. I whispered into the silence, not as a prayer, but as a thought. Maybe God isn't asking me to hold on anymore. Maybe he's telling me to let go. The decision formed quietly but firmly. I would sell the estate. I would not live inside walls poisoned by lies. I would not let Eleanor's memory be chained to Damien's downfall. Starting over at 63 wasn't what I imagined, but perhaps it was exactly what I needed. The realtor was surprised when I called. Mr. Harlow homes in Aspen like yours don't sit on the market long. Even with the publicity, we'll have buyers lined up. Within 2 weeks, she was right. Offers poured in, investors from California, families from New York, even a developer who wanted to turn the property into a luxury rental. The price was high, more than enough to cover the mortgage and legal fees, with money left to start anew. The day I signed the contract, I walked from room to room one last time. I touched the marble counters Eleanor had polished with pride, the banister Damien had slid down as a boy, the window where I once watched him play soccer in the yard. Memories came in waves, sweet, bitter, and everything between. But as I closed the front door for the last time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: release. The estate had been a fortress, but it had also been a cage. It tied me to a past I could no longer fix, to a son I could no longer save. Selling it wasn't surrender, it was reclaiming my life. I moved into a penthouse in downtown Denver, far smaller, but with sweeping views of the Rockies Eleanor loved. No cedar beams, no wine cellar, no antique chandeliers, but also no lies hidden in the corners, no whispers of betrayal seeping from the walls. Just clean air, open sky, and the sound of my own heart finally beating without fear. For the first time in a long time, I sat on my balcony with a cup of black coffee and thought, perhaps God has given me this second chance not to mourn what I lost, but to honor what remains. 6 months after leaving Aspen, I found myself standing on the balcony of my Denver penthouse as dawn broke across the Rockies. The city below was just beginning to stir, delivery trucks, humming streetlights, fading windows, lighting one by one. Above it all, the mountains glowed gold under the first touch of sun, as if God himself had painted them fresh that morning. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee, breathing in the crisp air. It was different here. No towering ceilings echoing with silence. No hallways haunted by footsteps of the past. Just a clean slate glass and steel framing a view that reminded me of resilience. People had asked why I sold the Aspen estate when the courts had cleared my name. Why give up a property worth millions, a home others would have killed to keep? The answer was simple. A house may hold memories, but it can also hold chains. I couldn't live among walls where every surface whispered betrayal. By letting it go, I freed myself. Life in Denver was smaller, yes, but also sharper, clearer. I cooked simple meals, took morning walks to a nearby park, even joined a chess club at the community center. The men there didn't know me as the father of the criminal or the retired investigator. They just knew me as Gregory, the quiet guy who played a steady game, never rushing, always 2 moves ahead. And yet, even in this new life, the shadow of Damien lingered. 2 letters had arrived from prison, both unopened, still sitting on the kitchen counter. Some nights I stared at them, wondering what words he had scribbled inside. Apologies, accusations, promises to change, but I never tore them open. Because forgiveness isn't something you force. It's something that arrives when truth and time make space for it. And I wasn't there yet. Still, I didn't feel bitterness. Oddly enough, I felt lighter. Damien's choices had been his own. For years, I had carried the weight of his failures as if they were mine. Selling the house, cutting the ties, that was me, finally setting down the burden. As I stood on that balcony, I realized something else too. Perhaps God had never promised me a peaceful life. Perhaps what he gave me instead was the strength to survive storms, even the ones that rose inside my own home. I had faced criminals on the streets, but the hardest battle had been learning when to draw the line with my own blood. And somehow I had walked through it. Not unscarred, but unbroken. I thought of Eleanor then, the way she used to tilt her head back and laugh when the world felt too heavy. I imagined her beside me looking out at the mountains. Maybe she would have told me I was too hard on Damien, or maybe she would have admitted that I had done what she never could. Either way, I felt closer to her in that moment than I had in years, not through the walls of a house, but through the clarity of finally choosing truth over illusion. The Rockies stretched endlessly, their peaks sharp against the morning sky. They had stood for millions of years, enduring storms, fire, and time itself. And I thought maybe that's what life is meant to be. Not perfect, not painless, but steady. Enduring. I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a man waiting for the next betrayal. I felt like a man who had survived one and lived to tell the story. The letters still sit on my kitchen counter. 2 envelopes creased from their journey through the prison mail system, Damien's handwriting scrawled across the front. For months, I've walked past them, sometimes pausing, sometimes picking one up just to feel its weight. But I've never opened them. People ask me if I'll ever read them. I tell them the truth, some bridges, once they burn, are best left as ash. Not out of hatred, not even out of anger, but because reopening them means inviting the smoke back into your lungs. I've had enough smoke. There was a time when I thought being a father meant endless forgiveness. That love was measured in how many times you could rescue someone, no matter how deep they sank. But I've learned something different. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. And surrender, when given to someone who only takes, destroys both of you. Sitting here in my Denver penthouse, looking out over the city lights each evening, I've come to see survival not as bitterness, but as wisdom. Perhaps God, in His quiet way, allowed me to face this trial so I would finally understand that lesson. He didn't spare me from betrayal, but He gave me the strength to stand in its fire and not be consumed. I have enough now. Enough money from the sale of Aspen to live comfortably. Enough peace to enjoy mornings with coffee and evenings with books. Enough clarity to know that my worth was never tied to how much I gave my son or how much I let him take. My worth was always my own, rooted in the years I served, the home I built, the woman I loved, and the integrity I refused to abandon. Damien will serve his sentence. Maybe prison will change him. Maybe it won't. That choice belongs to him now. For the first time in decades, his choices no longer chain me. That is the real freedom, not just financial, not just legal, but spiritual. I keep thinking about Eleanor. If she could see me now, would she think I was too harsh? Or would she see that in protecting myself, I was also honoring her? She always believed in grace, but she also believed in dignity. And I think she would have understood that this standing tall, unbroken, is the closest I can come to honoring both. The truth is simple, though. Hard to accept sometimes. Family can be the sharpest knife. Sometimes the people you trust most will cut the deepest. And when that happens, survival doesn't mean hatred. It means choosing to protect the life God gave you, even if that means closing the door on the very people you thought you'd never walk away from. So I sit here, letters unopened, and I feel no guilt. I feel peace. Because my story isn't about a son who betrayed a father. It's about a man who refused to let betrayal define the rest of his days. And maybe that's the message you need to hear right now. That it's not weakness to walk away from those who would destroy you, it's courage. That choosing dignity isn't selfish, it's necessary. That sometimes the most powerful act of love is the refusal to be consumed by someone else's darkness. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? A child, a spouse, a friend? Did you choose to keep carrying their weight, or did you finally set it down? I want you to share your story in the comments below, because these conversations matter more than you know. And if this story has resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to Brian's Story. Share it with someone who might need to hear that survival dignity and faith are not luxuries, they're birthrights. Because at the end of the day, no one child, spouse, or stranger has the right to strip you of your worth. That belongs to you and to God alone.